recording. Okay. Rightio. So what I'm going to do is I reckon I'll start by walking through the assignment specs, and feel free to ask questions about any aspect as we go through, and then I'll actually have a look at the startup code and answer any questions you've got. Firstly, I want to kind of make clear, I think some people were confused on whether they could use my solution as their starting point. Was anyone feeling a bit confused about that? Yeah. Well, I would encourage you to use my code as a starting point, but yeah. Okay, well, that's a different matter. If you are concerned about how well you did in your assignment 1, then I would encourage you to very, very heavily encourage you. Yep. Well, some people might feel that I did the same, although I tried to limit the amount of repeated code, for example, because otherwise you have the same code for checking if you can capture, and then when you actually do the capture, I added them to a stack, so I only have to do it once. But there's that kind of stuff will be new for many people, but I put it in there to show you some of the techniques you can actually use in programming, right? Yeah. Alrighty. So I'll start by just walking through the assignment. Stop me at any point if something is not clear. Yeah. So each the thing that we're storing here is we're going to be storing reverse score pointers, right? That I feel that's the easiest way. So that means when you add to a list a score, you should malloc one of these. That's really probably the best way to go. And does everyone understand why I only need to get a score, I only need to malloc a reverse score? Why I don't need to, say, malloc the winner and loser? Correct. Well, it's more size of reverse score includes these two arrays. That's part of the size of the thing. Because they're arrays, they're part of the size of the struct. And that's actually a good point, that one of the differences, and you'll see how I use this in my Reversity play game, that in fact these are actually pointers to things already allocated. Yep, they are actually pointers to things in the players array. And therefore, again, like if I was going to allocate a pointer to one of these, and in fact I wanted to malloc the players, I could do that. But it makes no sense, because in this case you actually see, actually I'll bring that up. If I go into A2 and I'll go into startup, not solution, and in reversitygame.c, see that down here I in fact assign the values. Yeah. And these are pointers, which were basically, we got the address of the players earlier and we're returning it, so it's all good. It's, yeah. But because they're pointers, they have to point to a valid allocation. Whereas an array, we're actually already allocating that memory by the declaration of the array. Okay, now one of the things that I've done, and it's something you need to kind of grapple with, is in fact I've provided two different kinds of lists. A reversity list. They're both called reversity list, but one of them, this one here, is an array list. So we see that this is an array of pointers to struct reversity score, where we have the number of scores. Okay. So you will need to malloc space for each pointer before you insert it into this array list. Right? Likewise, in the so that's for the array list version, and so that's like, you should be fairly familiar with arrays by now, so this should be actually a bit easier to actually do, because you've had lots of practice with arrays in assignment 1. The big difference here is that the thing that is being stored is a pointer. Therefore it was, in this case, it is something which has been malloc. And so that's the array list version. Then, so you're also going to need to implement a linked list version, and you can see this looks very similar to the lab code that we've, or to the code I've gone through in the tutorials. Yep. Can everyone see that? This is very similar to what you've seen. Yep. And so the actual code that we've gone through in the tutorials, you should use that as a starting point. Now, I don't want you to do things like copying and pasting of code and whatever, but it's more about the principles, right? That in fact we do the same things. Like for example, for an insert, we do the same kind of iterations over the list, right? And then we find the insertion point, and then we insert that between previous and next, for example. Yeah, so there is the big task is to adapt the code that I've provided to a new task, right? And the task is the management of a scoreboard. Well, whereas the code we had before was the management of a list of persons for who knows what reason. So, and each list, the scoreboard must be sorted by the order of the one by member. So that's this fella, one by member of the score of each score. So, and we see here is the actual definition of scoreboard. Now, what's a little bit different here to what you might have seen elsewhere in this declaration? Well, there's that, yes. What that means is that the thing that you have to allocate memory for fname before assigning it. You can't change fname. And you might have to do some tricky casts. With things like freeing and that kind of stuff. Because freeing a pointer is a modification of the data. There's a little bit of a tricky one. Yep. Because this is const, you will need to malloc some space and then copy. Actually, you could probably just use my stradupe function and then assign the result of that to this pointer. Okay, people who haven't read through my code, in reverse helpers.c. Oh, really? Is audio bad for others? That's kind of Blackboard, because they use very heavy compression. And that actually, yeah. That's one of the downsides of actually using Blackboard Collaborate, is that heavy compression. Okay. Okay. I have this function here, stradupe. Okay, I'll come back to that, Ian. It's important. But you see, I in fact pass in a string here, and I make it, I malloc space, and then copy the original data into the new pointer, and then return the copy. Right? This is in fact this function is actually implemented in later versions of C, but I find it quite useful, and so I provide my own implementation. And you could just use this to allocate space for the F name and then assign the result. Well, yeah. Okay. So now coming back to that question of the const. Okay. Freeing of a pointer is considered a modification, and so you'll have to cast this to a char star to free it, because you can't free a const char star. It's one of those quirks of the language. Because freeing a pointer is modification of it. Well, that's what I found in my implementation, that I had to cast that. But what about this thing here? What's a little bit quirky about that compared to what you might have seen before? Well, yeah. That's not quite the issue here. The fact is that it's not a pointer. And so that may have some impact on your implementation. You know, because your functions should accept a list pointer as a first parameter. Just like our implementations in the tutorials. Yeah. So, but it is something to think about. So, The other thing here is that one of your first things you need to do is define the interfaces for the list. So what might make sense, and I know that other people are already doing this, is that they are implementing one of the kinds of lists, so an array list or a linked list, and then they will copy those prototypes into the other header file and then implement them for that different data structure, because they'll have different implementation. I think that's fine. It sounds like a good idea to me. Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying, by the way I've designed this assignment, I'm trying to force you into some good practices. Like, all access of the list data structure should be via a function. Yep. Kind of, yeah. Well, it's the idea that in fact what we do is we have well-defined interfaces, and that's how we use our data structures. It's not so much getters and setters, because I'm not really a fan of them, but you know, if you think about a class in an object-oriented language, you have a series of defined operations on that class. And I'm trying to encourage you to use similar practices here. In fact, the truth is, this is how good programmers in any language do things. So I do have a bit of a question. Do you find these helpful? These commands for compiling the code? Yep. You don't. If the meaning of it is a little bit confusing, don't worry about it. But this was your starting point. Then what you want to do when you get up to the question of makefiles, have a look again at the material that I presented on Monday around makefiles. The additional thing you need to do, however, is that you need to remove all of the object files when you compile, say, reverse the array, because you don't want any of the linked list versions left over, because they will mess with your code. They'll, yeah, you'll get all kinds of memory problems from that. Trust me, because I did. And so I've tried to manage this in such a way so that you can avoid some of the problems I had when I was compiling and debugging. I've already done the hard work for the conditional compilation stuff. Okay. Okay, so probably the next thing to talk about is the file format. Pretty simple. So we have comma separated values with the name of the winner, loser, and the amount the winner won by. And these are obviously fictitious numbers. I just made them up. Yeah, well, no, what you can do is, in fact, make the clean target a prerequisite of the target for making array list or making linked list. And then that'll clean up all the files, and then it will recompile. And it's just, we have to do that because of the way I've done the conditional compilation stuff. Otherwise we get some issues. Not fun issues. Because basically the compiler tries to reinterpret the memory layout for a array list as if it was a linked list. It has to remove, because every file actually has the inclusion of either the array list version or the linked list version. So you have to delete the .o files. Yeah. But you don't have to worry about that until you get to the makefile component. Which, by the way, is why, like, I've actually made the makefiles worth more marks than I would have normally because of this issue. So that people, when they figure that out, they get the marks for it. Okay? Okay, so probably the next thing to talk about is the file format. So every line of the data file will be name, name, one by. Name, name, one by. Now, you'll notice that in the source code, I think it's in player. Okay. Every player, their name can be up to 20 characters. So that means thank you. That means that each name 20, 20. So that's 41 so far. 42. Yeah, 44 chars per line. If it's bigger than that, then it's not a valid line. Yeah. And so you should look for things. Well, there are certain things you should be looking for that I think we've already touched on some of those. So this needs to be a valid name. So the names need to be valid. The separation characters need to be commas. And this number needs to be a valid number for the possible range of scores. And given that there's 64 squares, that kind of gives you some kind of indication of things you might be thinking about in terms of validation. I want you to kind of think about it and come up with... There's only a few cases to test for. No, you should reject any file that is... Okay, let's jump to that question. Okay. You should reject any file which has some invalid data in it. Because that indicates that there may have been tampering with the data file. Yep. Okay, so there is... So you've got your lists interface design. So probably start with our tutorials on linked lists. I think that they give you some big hints on the functions you need to design. But there's probably a few more that we didn't cover in that tutorial as well. We've got the two list implementations. So they're their own self-contained module. Yeah, precisely. Init and all of those functions which we went through. So really that's what I'm doing, is I'm testing whether you've been paying attention, basically. If you like. Yeah, sure. You do need a consistent interface for both though. So they both need the same functions or your program won't work. Yeah, there is a certain direction that I'm pushing in the course material and in the assignment. There's a very strong consistency. Yeah. But also, actually, just to show you this, if you look at something like Java's and no, that's not the ones I want. I think it's collection. If you looked at something like Java's collections, you'll find a similar kind of theme. Right, there are... So we have something like the list interface. In fact, this is it, right? Essentially, you're doing something very similar in your code. You're creating we have a list interface, and then we have two separate implementations. We don't have inheritance, so we're doing something a little bit different to kind of show a similar idea. So that's essentially what I'm trying to get you to do. Yeah, so it shouldn't be too much of a issue there. So there was a little bit of a concern with the command line arguments thing. Essentially, the program should accept an optional argument. So if there is an argument, you open that file and it must be a valid data file, and if it isn't, you quit the program. Yep. But if there's no file, then just set it to null. Just set the f name to null, and then say, for example, you play a few games. And you can actually go into the menu, the scores menu, and save that data to a file. And it should be in the format that we've provided. Okay. Now, load data is a bit of a doozy. It's a pretty big function. Or, well, it shouldn't be one function. It should in fact be calling your already implemented list implementation to do most of the work. So, you'll tokenize each line, construct a score, malloc the space for that score, and then copy the score data in, and then call your add function to do the list adding. So if when you open the file, if it fails, now if the value is enoent, which is a special global constant, if erno is enoent, that means that the file was that basically we're creating a new file. Right? However, if there's an attempt to open the file and it's some other error, you should use p-error to print out the error. So what I'm trying to push here is consistent error handling and using the resources provided to you to get that done. I'm expecting a few more questions about this as we get closer to the deadline, which is not far away. Okay, main menu, easy marks. Print this out and enter into the right option on the selection of each one. So if I press 1, I should play a game. If I press 2, I go into the scores menu, and 3, I should start the process of exiting the program. So when a game is run to completion, you will see in my code here that I return this result pair. And result pair is a reverse player pair which has a pointer to the winner and the loser. Given I've already given you that code, there's no marks for that, and it's probably a reason to not use your own code is that, like, if this is missing and it doesn't fit in with this has to fit in with everything else. So if you use your own code, you actually need to modify it. Well, you may need to modify it to actually return a winner and loser pair. Okay. This, by the way, this approach of using a pair like this is in fact, there's an object in C++ that plays a similar role. So I'm actually giving you yet another example of how data structures are used out there. Okay. Okay. So what you'll need to do is you in reverse scoreboard add, you're going to have to, where is it? Where's that fella? Yes, go away. You're going to have to see, we've got a reverse player pair pointer, so you need to pass that in here from from main when it receives the reverse player pair, and convert that into hang on, what did I do? Into a score. It should be fairly easy. You're just copying the values from one data structure into another, and a little bit of a calculation about the amount won by. And then you're going to insert that into, you're going to pass that into the list to insert it. And list add, your list add needs to insert things in sorted order by score, with the scores, with high scores closer to the beginning of the list. Yeah? Does that make sense? And you'll see that I have a smattering of these fellas throughout, and that is, you know, hints, Correctamundo, yes. And you'll also notice that I actually insert these comments inside various functions to give you a hint of how to get the job done. Sometimes I don't do it, sometimes I do. Sometimes I feel what's in the assignment spec is enough. But if you're at all not sure what you got to do, I'm here to answer your questions. So, just one thing is that you probably want to treat score as well as just a bundle of data and think about the things which you might want to do with a score. So that you actually well-defined interfaces, separation of functionality. These are really important concepts in modern programming. Okay, so the scores menu, I want you to print out the scoreboard. And if the scoreboard is empty, just print out the scoreboard is currently empty. And provide this menu. So delete. So to remove a single score, reset the whole scoreboard to empty. Save scores to a different file name. So this should behave pretty much like save as does in Word or something, right? Or return to the main menu. So deleting a score. In this case, I delete the third score. So we start up here. So that's Dave versus Fred. Well, an empty scoreboard should save an empty file. So I'll show you what I mean. So for example, and that means an empty file is a valid score file. Yeah? So okay, so let's touch scores2.dat. Actually, let me go into solution and say okay, scores.dat is empty. So if I do reverse yeah. And in fact, in that case, if I save it, save successfully, yep. Oh, really? Hang on, let me just I really should have more consistency. I'm very sorry. Yes, you are correct. That should have 1, 2, 3. Because otherwise, how is the user going to select? Now, think about this here though. I want you to think about, with this kind of deleting of scores like this, I want you to think a little bit about whether this makes a linked list a good choice for this program. Right? Because, for example, I'm deleting things at certain indexes. So would a linked list be better, or would an array list be better? Something to think about. Oh, do you need to free memory? Absolutely. And 4 becomes 3, yes. But I don't actually... I would say that this 1, 2 and so on don't need a representation in your list itself. This is simply an order which allows a user to select an item. Well, it's always going to go, 1 is going to be the first element, 2 is the second element, and so on. Correct. Yeah. Yep, that's right. But you can tell how many scores there are, because there is an element of the list structure that gives you that. So here, this reset scoreboard to empty, just free the whole lot and reset the list to an empty list. So if you then saved the scoreboard after this, you get an empty file. Yep, like I said, just something about file names is I kind of tend to follow Unix conventions on file names, in that extensions don't matter, and therefore you shouldn't be validating for extensions. Generally speaking, what I will do is, if people are rejecting, what I consider to be a valid file name, so here, meh.foo, yeah, it's a valid, Unix considers it a valid file name, so I consider it a valid file name. There are very few characters which should be avoided in file names. One of them is a new line character. If a file is an illegal file name, then it will most likely Well, it does if open fail. I'm not going to be much more, yeah. What I say is that if I say, okay, here's an example. If I go into 2, 3, okay, this should fail. Right? And the reason it failed is because there is no foo directory. But if I that succeeded because that was legal. There is somewhere to save it. And I should in fact be able to yeah, I should be able to do that. So what I'll do there, oops, and let me do something like Fred, Barney, 12. And then yep. Yeah, sure. But it's a valid file. So yeah. Yeah, it should just, operate reasonably robustly. So that's the focus there. Okay. So here's an example where okay, what I will do is chmod, don't worry what this means. Basically I'm making the file read-only. So this file is now read-only. So if I go back to the main menu and go to save it and go yes, the file fails to save because it was read-only. And you see this error here comes from p error, from the p error function, this permission denied. Yep. I always have a requirement somewhere in the assignment about using Control D and Enter. It's just, I think it's buffer handling is important given the language. Well, it's important generally, but in C in particular. Yep. Yep. Okay, makefile. Basically, you're going to need to have targets for reverse array and reverse linked. Most of the details on making makefiles, on creating or writing a makefile, were actually covered in the lecture, the chat on Monday. But you need to adapt that to these reverse array and reverse linked. So, okay, memory management. Now, how do we check for whether there's any problems in our program in terms of memory? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call Valgrind track origins equals yes, leak check equals full, reverse array, and I will do various things in here. So firstly what I will do is, okay, I'll quit the program, no. Oh, there is a small bug in my program. That's an interesting one. I'll fix, yeah, it's easy to fix. But okay, looking at this, right? And I'm surprised no one's raised this yet, but I have but this is here to show you what I'm going to be looking for. And I'm sticking to that story. So in Stradoop, remember Stradoop? That was that function which actually copies the copies a string in load data. So can anyone take a guess at what the problem is here? What thing have I not freed? It's not the file opening. See, it's in load data, Stradoop. What's Stradoop do? Right? You see, it's actually mallocing the string. So in fact, it's the file name. Can you see how I went through that logic? I'm not freeing the file name. No. Because I return this and then I assign this to list F name. To scoreboard F name. Yeah? And therefore, I needed to free that. That's what this information here tells me. Load data, stradup, malloc. I know that in load data, I call stradup to actually allocate space for the file name. And remember, if we go back up here, where was it? Yeah, so but basically I expect to see none of this in your implementation. I should in fact have 0 bytes lost. Right? Okay. Let's go back to the assignment spec. So quitting the program involves prompting the user for whether they want to save the file, and if they do, save the file. Yep. And so memory management, this is a lot of marks. 8 marks. Now, the way that I mark this, it's even more marks. Because not only if you have, say, conditional based on uninitialized values or invalid reads or invalid writes, you will lose marks under that section where that is the case and here. And it's because it is so important. It's the big thing with this assignment. One of the big things with this assignment is memory allocation. Okay? I know that's tough, but I feel that is fair given the importance of memory management. In fact, I've seen quotes from some of the world's more famous developers who say that memory management is a key skill for C programmers. So people like, say, Linus Torvald, he's made comments about why he doesn't like C++ because it makes programmers lazy and because they don't free their own memory. And he won't work with C++ programmers for that reason. Well, whether he's right or not is a different matter, but that's the kind of attitude in terms of C. Okay. So this, let me just see, if there's stuff that I need to, oops. We go back to our terminal and I'll CD back out of solution to startup. Let's just, okay. So you can see that the array list, actually, why don't I? So you can see basically that this is a module where you've got freedom, right? Because I have specified very little. I have the data structure and then said, yep, go for your life. What do you think the implementation function should be? But I've given you lots of guidance. Okay, I've done the same. Here. Yep, that's right. Or let me just say, no changes to the startup code without consultation with me. And so if I say no, then it's no. And I'm almost certain to say no. I will say yes if there is something I have not considered in my implementation. So basically, if you picked up a bug, then sure. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. And in fact, really, like, this looks like a big project, right? Well, yeah, kind of. But actually, so game board is, you don't need to do anything in that, or game rules, or even reversing helpers. Yeah, you might add some stuff. Okay. But so probably only about a third of the files here that you need to actually edit. So if we have a look in reverse.io, so we just have the implementation, well, the functions, and here you should do all of the IO stuff, and you should call the linked list functions to actually do the inserts and all of that. Inserts, maybe even have something like a save score function. I don't know, it's up to you. I do expect you to use a little bit of creativity in the functions you define, but Yeah. Technically, you could possibly not write functions in here, but I would think it was not such a great implementation. I kind of do feel that there are things you need to do on a score, which makes sense to actually be a separate module. So that's pretty much it. Yeah, I think I've provided everything I can. Is there any final questions people have? Anything they're not sure about? Anything they'd like a little bit more hints or help with? Yeah, that's right. Really need to be getting into it now. Like all of the material you need pretty much for the assignment is there. So it's just, yeah. What about that? Oh, hang on. Yeah, I can see the argument one way or the other. Okay. Yeah, okay, I can see how that could, yeah, probably should have been. Yeah, I accept that, in fact, that's a criticism, a valid criticism of my implementation. Absolutely. Yeah. I do try to be consistent with this stuff, but sometimes it just slips in and I can be a little bit, yeah, a little bit, I guess, absent-minded there. Sorry about that. Okay. Oh well. Yep. Okay. So I might leave that there. Best of luck on your assignment. Hopefully you find it enjoyable. I really do put in work to try and come up with things which are going to be interesting for you. It matters to me. Yep. You're welcome. Cool. Alrighty. Yep, no worries. Take care, Josh. And everyone.